Welcome to the grades 1 through 4 program this week. Obviously, we have very special guests today from the Museum of Natural History. We have Sarah and Matt, and they're going to talk to you. First, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how we want to behave for our guests. We want to make sure that we're sitting still unless they call on us to move. We want to be respectful, and if you have cell phones in the audience, if you could take the time now to turn them off or put them on silent, that would be great. And we want to limit the side chatter because everyone wants to hear, okay? So let's give them a good Corville welcome.
Well, thank you for having us. Thank you for coming today. Like she said, my name is Sarah. I'm with the Museum of Natural History. Have any of you been there before? Recognize the guy in my shirt? Okay. Rusty, that's right. We've been traveling all over the state and nobody knows who Rusty is. So it's nice to be back where people know about Rusty. And this is Matt. He is helping out at the museum this summer, and he also works with the paleontology repository in the Department of Geoscience. So he's our fossil expert. And we're gonna talk about life in the Ice Age today as part of the summer reading program, because the theme is dig into reading, and we've been doing a lot of digging around the state. So I'm going to tell you about some big, what Iowa was like during the Ice Age, and also a big mammoth dig that we've been working on down in southern Iowa. So I'm going to go through a slideshow and tell you guys about that. And if you guys have any questions at the end, I'll certainly leave time for that. And then after that, you guys can come up and look at some of the cool stuff we've brought and ask Matt questions about things, and we'll tell you about the stuff we brought today, okay? Does that sound good? All right, how many of you have seen the Ice Age movies? All right, have them all, okay. So that's the time period we're talking about. And you can see we have a mammoth on our page here. This is one of the, for years we were working on a giant sloth excavation at the museum, digging up members of Rusty's family, and just for the last few years we've been working on a mammoth excavation. So we're learning a lot about mammoths at the museum. And I want to go to this map here. So we're talking about, and this is, the Ice Age is the period long after the time of dinosaurs. You know, we're talking about just thousands of years ago, which is a long time to us, but to people like Matt who study geology and paleontology, they're used to dealing with things in terms of millions of years ago. So we're talking about Iowa approximately 14,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago during the last Ice Age. So you may or may not know that there were many ice ages through time where our planet was getting warmer and colder and warmer and colder. And these giant sheets of ice called glaciers, have you guys heard of the word glacier before? Were kind of expanding and covering more parts of the world, and then when it would get warmer, they would melt away and back and forth through time. So when we talk about the Ice Age, we're usually talking about the very last one. Like I said, say about 14,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago, which is about the end of the last Ice Age. So here's a picture of Iowa, or a map of Iowa, different than what you've probably seen before. And there's a big bluish-whitish blob in the middle of it. Does anybody have a guess what that bluish-whitish blob might be? Yeah. It's a glacier, okay? So at certain points of the Ice Age, Iowa was completely covered by ice, so not a whole lot going on here. But at the end of the last Ice Age, just that part of Iowa was covered by a glacier. And if you were up in this part, it would be really thick ice. Down here, it would have been thinner ice that would have actually had some plants and trees growing on it, but still ice. And we call that the Des Moines lobe because it reached down to about present-day Des Moines, if you see where that red star is in the middle, okay? So where that ice was, not a whole lot was going on about 14,000 years ago. But in the rest of Iowa, around the glacier, there was actually a lot going on, okay? So lots of plants and especially animals. We're going to talk mostly about the animals of the Ice Age. And we also had the very first Native Americans or Indians come into Iowa before the end of the last Ice Age. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's little images of animals all the way around there. What are some Ice Age animals that you guys know about? Yeah. Mammoths, okay. Yeah. Saber-tooths, okay. Sloths, yes, those are kind of our 3 favorite ones. Yeah. I can't hear you, sorry. Oh, dodos? Okay, so dodos were in the Ice Age movie. They actually weren't in Iowa during the Ice Age, but they went extinct like some of, have you guys heard the word extinct before? So it means they died out and there's no more of them. So that's kind of why they included them in the movie, but we didn't have them in Iowa. The what? Dinosaur, well, depends on who you ask, or who you ask about that. A lot of birds are actually living dinosaurs, yeah. There were American lions. A lot of people don't know about that. Has anybody heard of a mastodon before? Okay, some of you. Mastodons are related to mammoths. Okay, they're both types of elephants. Both of them lived in Iowa during the Ice Age. So we covered kind of the most well-known ones. Did you know we had giant beavers during the Ice Age that were the size of grizzly bears? Can you imagine that? That's kind of one of the strangest ones. We also had camels roaming around Iowa during the Ice Age. Now, camels obviously aren't extinct. They just don't live in Iowa anymore. But where do camels live today? Is it in cold, icy places? In the desert.
The hot desert.
In the hot desert. So is that about the complete opposite of the Ice Age, as you can believe? Yeah, so camels are very adaptable. We also had animals that are still alive today. They just don't live in Iowa. So we had elk and caribou and moose and musk oxen, which today mostly live like up in Canada or further out west. And also some of the smaller animals that are still alive running around in our backyards were living in Iowa during the Ice Age. So not everything was huge, but we had things like bunny rabbits and squirrels and possums during the Ice Age too.
I used to see birds in my backyard.
Yeah, okay, so there were lots of birds during the Ice Age too. There were lots of really big birds like condors and things like that during the Ice Age. So all those animals, yeah. What else? Okay. So the animals we just talked about were all roaming around Iowa during the Ice Age. And on our map here, we have 4 stars that highlight some of the most important Ice Age sites that have been found in Iowa to date. So down in the southwest corner here, this is the Tarkio Valley Sloth Site, which some of you that have been to the museum have probably heard us talk about or seen signs about. That's where we've been digging up a family of giant sloths from the Ice Age, and we're doing research on them. Actually, just this morning, we haven't been digging at the site for a while, but just this morning we were working on some of the bones from that dig to take some samples from them and send them off to another university to do some testing. So that was just a couple hours ago. That is a part of an adult giant sloth. Does anybody have a guess what part of the giant sloth? Can you guys see what Matt's holding there? What part of the animal that might be? That is part of the leg. Okay, that's the femur, or the thigh bone, okay? That's a really big thigh bone, isn't it? But if you've seen Rusty in person, you know how big Rusty is, so he's got big legs. All right, so we've got the sloth site. The star in the middle, that's at the bottom of the glacier. That is in Des Moines. That's where they discovered some mammoth bones right smack in downtown Des Moines not too long ago. Has anybody been to the State Historical Museum there in Des Moines? Okay, a few of you. And have you seen their big, they have a full-size mammoth replica there, okay? So they have a wonderful mammoth exhibit there. And several years ago, when they were building a parking ramp right in the middle of downtown Des Moines, they had an excavator that was digging really deep so it could put in some footings for the parking ramp. And the scooper started coming up with mammoth bones in it. And so they weren't able to recover the whole mammoth, but the bones that they did find are on display at the State Historical Museum, along with this full-sized replica they have. So that's a wonderful exhibit. I encourage everybody to see that. And a wonderful museum with lots of other stuff as well. So that's the Allied Mammoth Site in downtown Des Moines. The blue star is for the Mahaska County Mammoth Site that I'm going to talk more about at the end of the presentation, or towards the end of this. And that's where we've been working just for the last few years at a farm outside of Oskaloosa, digging up lots of mammoth bones. And then all the way to the right, which is in Cedar County, so just directly east of Johnson County where we are right now, is the oldest people site in Iowa, the oldest Native American or Indian site, and it's called the Rummels Mosque site. And that's where a group of people during the Ice Age, and these weren't cavemen or Neanderthals, these are modern human beings just like you and me, came into Iowa, and they had a bunch of spear points, and they were mammoth hunters. They were hunting mammoths and other big animals as well as smaller animals, and they left behind a bunch of their stone tools, mostly spear points. There was no bones found at the site. We're actually going to go back and dig at that site in another year or two, and maybe we'll be able to find some bones. That's a site that's never been fully dug up. They've only dug up little parts of it. But that's the oldest human site in Iowa, and it's probably about 13,000 years old. So those were the people that lived alongside these crazy animals that we just talked about and hunted them as well. So those are kind of the four main Ice Age, or the four most important Ice Age sites in Iowa. Although bones of Ice Age animals have been found in almost every county in Iowa, including Johnson County here. And here's a picture of some of the animals we talked about. So we've got the mammoth, which was the biggest thing during the Ice Age. The mastodon, like I said, was another type of elephant from the Ice Age, a little bit smaller than mammoth. The bison, I forgot to mention the bison. So bison or buffalo were also roaming around Iowa during the Ice Age and were much bigger than the bison or buffalo we have today. The giant sloth, our favorite animal, of course, the camel. We have the American lion on there, the giant beaver, again, just to get an idea of how big that is, almost the size of a horse. And the horses during the Ice Age were actually bigger than the horses we have today. So some of the animals that we just talked about, so you can kind of see the size comparison to each other. Excuse me, I forgot to mention we had dire wolves during the Ice Age. So saber-tooths weren't the only predator or meat eater during the Ice Age. We had dire wolves. We also had giant short-faced bears, which were even bigger than saber-tooths. And it's just a few years ago that we found the very first giant short-faced bear bone in Iowa, and that's on display over at the Old Capitol. I'll show you some pictures from that exhibit in a second. So this is an illustration that an artist made to kind of give us an idea of what this part of the world may have looked like at the end of the last Ice Age. Because usually when we imagine the Ice Age in our head, or when you guys, close your eyes and picture the Ice Age or what you've seen from movies and documentaries, it's probably all white and icy and blizzardy, right? We call it the Ice Age. And that would be the case if you were living like right next to the glacier or on the glacier. But most of the animals, almost all the animals, would have been down on the ground away from the glaciers where it wasn't quite as cold. You can see, so we have the ice sheets, the glaciers way off in the distance. See, there's lots of water melting off of them, so this is towards the end of the Ice Age. Lots of rivers and pools and some snow and stuff up front, but really, not too different than what we see today. And you see all these animals of all different sizes living together, that it's actually very similar to, say, the African savanna today, where there's just all these different types of animals of all different sizes living together in an ecosystem. Yeah?
I've been studying the Ice Age
Uh-huh.
for about a couple of years, so I've been trying to see DNA sequences.
Have you? Yeah, so there's a lot of research going on Ice Age animals and looking at DNA, especially mammoths. There's been a lot of work on that recently. So this is what we can imagine Iowa would have looked like about 14,000 years ago. And about 10,000 years ago, this is what happened. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened relatively quickly. That about 35 different types of animals that were living in North America, also some of the larger birds too, went extinct. And we already talked about what extinct means. It means they died out and there's no more of them. And so that, as you can imagine, really changed our environment quite a bit. We had some different types of animals move in from the southern part of the continent, southern part of the world, to kind of fill in the gaps left behind. But that's a lot of animals to lose pretty quickly. And we call it a mass extinction. Okay, what's the most famous mass extinction where a lot of stuff died out? And somebody already mentioned it. The dinosaurs, okay? So does anybody know what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs?
Meteorite.
A meteorite, okay.
Eruption.
Okay, yep. So scientists have been studying that for a really long time. Scientists are still studying what caused this mass extinction at the end of the Ice Age, and not all scientists agree about that. There's a few different theories. We know that certain animals, don't adapt to change as well as others, and so it was mostly the bigger animals that went extinct. The planet may have gotten too warm for them, their food sources may have changed. There were probably diseases coming into this part of the world from other animals moving in. And also, there were the Native Americans, the Indians that I already mentioned, that moved into Iowa that were hunting these animals. So some scientists blame the early Native Americans on hunting those animals to extinction. But we know that that's not the case because those Native Americans were also hunting deer and bison and rabbits and squirrels and little things too that didn't go extinct. But it probably, if animals weren't doing very well already and they had people chasing after them with spears, it probably wasn't very good, okay? But we know it's not their fault. Okay, so people have been finding bones from Ice Age animals in Iowa for a very long time. So I have some cool photos here, historic photos. The one up in the left here is a farmer that doesn't look too happy from the 1920s, but he found part of a mastodon in his farm while he was out plowing his fields, and this is from near Amana. These are the bones of the Amana mastodon, if anybody's heard of that. And so do you guys see these long, skinny, curved bones here? They look like tusks, but they're not. What's another part of the animal that might have a bone like that? They're ribs, okay? So you guys know where your ribs are. Okay, we have lots of ribs up and down on each side. That's what holds our insides and our guts in, okay? Well, if you're an elephant, you have really big ribs, okay? So he found some ribs and part of the pelvis and some other bones. The photo down below is a collection of some of the early finds across Iowa, most of which are currently at the university in the paleontology repository where Matt works. And so there's parts of tusks in there, jaws, teeth, all kinds of things, big bones, small bones. And some of these bones are in a display that I'll talk about in a second. On the top right, there is a scientist from the University of Iowa in the 1960s digging at that Rummel's Mask site that I mentioned from Cedar County where they were finding a bunch of spear points. And that was just found out in the middle of a cornfield, okay? And then my favorite picture is the one on the lower left here. So we have 3 kids, about all of your guys' age here, laying on the ground next to some bones that they found, okay? You guys see how big this bone is?
Like just found on the ground?
They just found while they were out playing outside, okay? So this is a reason for you guys to go play outside a little more, okay? You look around for stuff like that, and then you let me know what you find, okay? So these kids found parts of a mammoth, okay? We have, anybody want to guess what part of a mammoth that would be? How about way in the back there? That is their leg bone. That's their femur, okay? Thigh bone. And then a rib here, and this is part of a scapula. Who knows what your scapula is? Trick one. It's your shoulder blade, okay? So if you feel behind you, that bone that sticks out, that's hooked onto the top of your arm, that's your scapula. Well, in a mammoth, it's huge, okay? So I show you those pictures just to point out that a lot of the main discoveries of Ice Age stuff around Iowa then and today isn't found by the scientists. We aren't usually the ones that find the stuff. It's farmers and just people out looking around, and sometimes kids like you guys that find the stuff, and then you let us know about it, and then we can go out and do some research at the site. So if you are out poking around, just keep your eyes out, and I'm going to tell you about a few sites that were found relatively recently, both by farmers that let us know about what they found. Okay, have any of you been to the Iowa's Ice Age Giants exhibit at the Old Capitol Museum? Okay, a couple of you. So that is a special exhibit that the Museum of Natural History and the Paleontology Repository put together. It went up in April, and it is up through early August. So you have a few weeks left to see it. It's over at the Old Capitol Museum in one of their galleries. So at the Museum of Natural History, we don't have much space to put on these big exhibits. But we work a lot with the Old Capitol Museum, and so we are hosting the exhibit over there. And so some of the bones that are in some of those historic photos I showed you are on display there. Here's some images of some of the things on display. We have a skull from a saber-toothed cat. We have some bones from the Mahaska County Mammoth site, the Tarkio Valley Sloth site. And we wanted to point out the giant beaver skull. Okay, we have 2 of those in the display alongside, yep, and they're like this big. The teeth are like that long. And then we have a modern beaver skull right next to it, just so you can compare how, those skulls are only about this big, okay? So that's one of our favorite things in the exhibit. So I just want to encourage all of you to come check out that exhibit. The Old Capitol Museum is open the same hours as the Museum of Natural History. It's free as well and open on the weekends. We're open late on Thursdays. So you have a few more weeks to go see that exhibit. All right, so I've already mentioned the Tarkio Valley Sloth site a few times, but I just want to kind of point out, yeah, you have a question?
Is there a way you can tell between a fossil and a rock? If you stick your tongue on it, and it kind of just come down immediately. So I feel like will the rock break? And if your tongue sticks kind of so you have to
Sometimes, and with bones too, sometimes that's how you can tell. We're told that as scientists, but then we're also told not to put stuff in our mouth, but sometimes that's the only way to tell, you're right. So the giant sloth site I've mentioned a couple times is way down here in southwest Iowa, and we've done lots of programs about that site at the museum over the years. The bones from that site have actually been donated to the Paleontology Repository, and they will eventually go on display at the museum, although we still have lots of research left to do on those bones, and so it'll probably be several years. This is what we call our CSI photo of the bones from the adult giant sloth that we found. So you can see we found not the entire animal, but lots of it, and actually it's the second most complete adult giant sloth ever found in North America of this species, so that's pretty exciting. I always put in a picture of Rusty because, like I said, we've been traveling all over Iowa talking about the Ice Age, and a lot of people have never seen Rusty before, but it's wonderful that many of you have. And then we have a photo of some of the toddler sloth bones that we found at the site, just to show how well preserved they are. Those bones are over 100,000 years old, and some of them came out of the ground and we just rinsed them off and they were in perfect condition. Some of them were broken and we had to put back together. But this is kind of what it looks like when we find a bunch of bones. We don't just find a bone, pull it out of the ground, find a bone, pull it out of the ground. We want to kind of see how they are all laid out in the ground. And so when we find a bone, we kind of spread out, but we leave it in the ground. We number them. We take lots of pictures. We measure things. Somebody's got their tape measure in there. So we want to keep track of where everything comes out, okay? Because that can tell us a lot about how the animals died and what was going on at the site there. Okay, so the site that we've been working on a lot over the last 2 years is the Mahaska County Mammoth site, which was discovered just a few years ago by a farmer outside of Oskaloosa, the red county there, not too far from Johnson County here. And so the first bone that the farmer found was that one right there, and he and his son were just walking along a creek bank on their farm. In the summer, they were out looking for blackberries, and the son just kind of pointed out to his dad, like, hey, that looks like a muddy soccer ball down in that creek. How weird is that? And the dad looked at it and thought, well, there shouldn't be a ball eroding out of the dirt like 10, 15 feet below the ground surface. That's got to be something else. And what they were seeing was that black section of the bone over here that Matt's pointing out. It was just that part of the bone was sticking out, and it is round and about the size of a soccer ball. But they hopped down in the creek and they started poking around, and they ended up with that gigantic bone. That's actually my hand in the picture, so there's your scale right there. See how big that is. And they had found a leg bone of a mammoth, like we've seen in some of the other photos. And it's about 4 feet long and 75 pounds. That's a really big bone. So it's a good thing they didn't just keep walking on by, but that they stopped to investigate, because the dad thought something's not right about that. So over the next several months, so the farmer got in touch with the university and sent us pictures. He was pretty sure it was a mammoth, but wanted to make sure, and we said, yep, that is definitely a mammoth. Over the next year or so, he kept finding bones in that area, and he would send us pictures every few months. This is a picture of bones laid out on his kitchen table. Now, how cool is that to have mammoth bones laying all over your kitchen table there? That doesn't happen every day, right? But this was a picture that we got really excited about for two main reasons. So first of all, he was finding lots of bones. And he was finding bones from all different parts of the animal, okay? So he had already found the thigh bone. Later, he found the lower leg bones, so he had a complete leg. He was finding lots of hand and foot bones from the mammoth. He was finding several ribs. You see the ribs down there. And he was finding vertebrae. You guys know where your vertebrae are, the spinal bones, okay, up and down your back. Those three in the middle there that are stacked up are the three vertebrae right from the base of the neck of the mammoth. So he was finding bones from all different parts of the body. Sometimes when you find parts of an animal, you may only find an arm or a leg, but he was finding bones from all over. And he was also finding bones of all different sizes. He found the biggest bone in the body, the leg bone. He was finding medium-sized bones, and he was finding some of the little tiny bones, like those that Matt's pointing out. Those bones are only about the size of a golf ball, okay? So he was finding the biggest bones in the body and the smallest bones in the body. And since these bones were in a creek, if the water had moved, stuff from the site a lot, if a lot of water had been moved through, what bones shouldn't be there? Think about what water does. Water picks stuff up and carries it with it if it's really forceful, okay? So if there had been like a massive flood running through that creek, what bones would we not have found? The little tiny ones, okay? Because water likes to pick up stuff and carry it with them. When it's moving pretty slowly, it just kind of picks up dirt and carries it with them. If it's moving a little bit faster, it'll take some rocks with it, and so on and so on. So, because we were finding those little teeny tiny bones, that gave us a clue that he was finding bones from all over the body. Those were our clues that this might be a really important and really complete site, which had never really been found in Iowa. And so early last year, the university started working with the farmer and started coordinating a dig at the site. So here are some pictures of scientists going out before we even started digging, looking at the soils all around the site, making some fancy maps with ground penetrating radar, or GPR. And so this is a type of map that the ground penetrating radar produces. So this is an area that we hadn't dug in yet, but we wanted to get a map to get an idea. So we can't just dig up this guy's whole farm. He wouldn't like that, okay? He's got to plant crops and he has cows and all that stuff. But we wanted to get kind of an idea of maybe a good place to dig. And so we started with this area just right next to where he was finding all the bones. And scientists from the university made this map for us and gave it to us. So if you were given a map like this, where would you think would be the best places to dig? If I don't tell you anything about what ground penetrating radar does. The red spot, okay? So on maps or think about like the weather radar. Usually red is like where stuff is, the weather is really bad. Well, on a GPR, that means that something is down below there. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bones. It could be a pile of rocks. It could be water. It could be just a different type of dirt. Sometimes, there are different types of dirt out there that have different minerals in them, and the radar may react differently to it. But yep, the red and the yellow spots are where something is different down below. So we did go dig up this area first, because I got very excited thinking, well, that looks just like a mammoth skull. Here's your skull. Here's your tusk, here's your tusk, even though that's not how GPR works, and the scientists said you can't look at it like that, but if you kind of squint your eyes at it a little bit, that's what it looks like. So we did dig up that area first, and that turned out to be a big old pile of rocks. So we were kind of bummed, but at least the map the radar did what it was supposed to do. It told us that there was something different down there. So throughout the season last year, we did work our way to the middle of that map. That's about as far as we got. And that middle red spot and yellow spot did turn out to be a big old pile of bones. So again, that radar's not going to pick up a single bone here and there, but that was a big cluster of bones where the skull and some other things were found. Excuse me. So like I said, that's about as far as we got last year. We just started digging at the site last month. We had to wait because there was so much flooding earlier this spring. Remember I said it's in the water, in a waterway, so we had to wait for the water to go down. They've been out a couple times. This is another type of map we made with a total station. I'm going to scooch through here so we can get to the pictures of the school stuff, or cool stuff. Yeah.
One time they were doing that in our school.
With
Saw a camera.
the yellow thing here, let me go back to that. So a lot of times you see people like street workers and highway workers out with, have you guys seen people out with machines like that, sometimes on street corners or maybe out at your school? So that is called a total station, and so a lot of different types of scientists and also other places use that to make topographic maps or to show the elevation. Okay, so in June of last year, we actually got to start digging. This is kind of a picture after the first or second dig. Just the very first bones were discovered down here. The farmer and his son had kind of moved this way to find some of the other bones, and then we were kind of moving that way. Okay. This project is almost totally done with volunteer help. We have some different scientists and students from the University of Iowa that are leading the excavation, but it's mostly the people that are actually helping us to dig at the site are volunteers. We started by reaching out to teachers and students from other schools, but we've also had just the farmers' neighbors come out, and people from all over the state, and actually other states have contacted us wanting to come out on, their free days on the weekend and come out and get dirty and do, kind of hard labor with us, because it's not the easiest job, but because they all wanted a chance to dig up a mammoth. So first couple months, we had lots of people out there. We were finding lots of hand and foot bones like Leah's holding here, lots of ribs, lots of students helping. Sometimes they'd all be kind of climbing over each other because they all wanted a chance to work on it. More and more ribs into July. At the end of July, we discovered this bone right here, which doesn't look like a whole lot, but that is a scapula or shoulder blade from the mammoth, okay? Now the farmer had already found a scapula, and now how many scapulae do we have? We have 2. How many do you think a mammoth have? Yep, so I just tricked you on purpose, because even though they have 4 legs the way we think about it, their insides are still like arms and legs. So they have 2 scapulae, okay? So the farmer had already found one. We found another one, and we thought, okay, they have 2 scapulae. All right, we found both of them. Well, then we got it back up to the farmhouse, and we cleaned it off, and we laid it by the first one that the farmer had found. And you can probably tell the one on the left is smaller than the one on the right. You see those silver things on there? Those are quarters. So usually we put a ruler in pictures like this to show how big it is, but we must not have had a ruler with us. So somebody put a quarter on each for scale, for kind of a reference. Okay? So not only was the one on the left smaller than the one on the right, and these aren't complete. They're missing a part up here, or down here, that kind of flares off. This is the sturdiest part of the bone, so a lot of times the blade part breaks off. But the one on the left was smaller than the one on the right, and they're from the same, they're both right scapulae, right shoulder blades. So what was that a clue for us? What did that tell us? Told us we had 2 mammoths. Up until this point, over the course of digging for a couple months, we just thought we had 1 mammoth. Because when you're finding a bunch of ribs, well, mammoths have a bunch of ribs, and they all kind of look alike. But when you have a bone like a scapula, where you only have 1 of each side, and you find 2 right ones, that tells you you have 2 mammoths. So we got very, very excited after that. We kept digging into August. We found this deeply buried tree stump, and then we kept clearing away from it. And we ended up finding part of the skull. Okay, so there's a tooth embedded in that jaw. The skull is broken, but it's kind of face down there. Here, Matt's going to get our tooth to show you what you're looking at, okay? So that is a model of a tooth, but what he's holding out, that's what we're seeing in the picture here. Here's a close-up, okay? Okay. And that black and white thing is a weird ruler that scientists use, okay? And so that was very exciting for us too. Think about your teeth or animals' teeth. Teeth can tell scientists a lot about an animal. What do you guys think scientists can learn about an animal from its teeth?
How big it is.
How big it is, how old it is, okay? So we have 2 sets of teeth. We have our baby teeth and our permanent teeth. Mammoths actually have 6 sets of teeth. So depending on what tooth it is in the sequence, that can tell us how old it is. What else? What it eats.
How long it is.
How long it is, okay. What else? Okay. Any other ideas? Yeah. Okay, yep, so if it was a meat eater or a plant eater, and we can also do studies on the tooth to see exactly what types of plants they were leaving or eating, because the plants leave scrapes on their teeth. It can tell us how healthy the animal is, okay? If it's not eating very well and it's not very healthy, its teeth aren't going to be in very good shape. Yeah.
Maybe what animal it is?
Yes, it can tell us what animal it is, definitely. So that can tell us for sure that we have a mammoth. And it can also tell you what species of mammoth you have, okay? So usually when we talk about mammoths, we talk about woolly mammoths, okay? But not all mammoths were woolly. And actually most of the mammoths in Iowa were not woolly mammoths. They were Columbian mammoths, which it's very hard to tell from the rest of the bones whether it's a woolly or a Columbian, but you can tell from the teeth based on the measurements, okay? So that told us, up until this point, we thought we had Columbian mammoths because that's what should be in southern Iowa. But turns out we have at least one woolly mammoth. Okay, so here we are putting a plaster jacket or cast around some of the skull fragments because they were pretty broken up. So it's like if you've ever broken an arm or a leg and you had to get a cast on it from the doctor. It's kind of the same thing, just not as pretty here. In September, we found our first tusk at the site. So if you're digging mammoths, you definitely want to find tusks, right? That's kind of one of the coolest parts of the animal. So we were very excited to find that. Okay. We were digging into October. Now you can see by this point in the season, we had dug ourselves into quite a mud hole there. We were so deep into the ground that water was coming up from down below, and so at the beginning of each dig day, we would have to get out a pump and try and pump out the water, but all day long it would be kind of coming up from down below, and you'd have to be very careful where you stepped because it was getting kind of like quicksand down below. Poor Ryan there in the black shirt, we had to dig him out a couple times. He would always step in the wrong spot. Not dig him totally out, but just like, up to his knee or so. But we kept finding lots of bones, more ribs and vertebrae, more parts of tusks. Here are 2 complete vertebrae, but from different parts of the animal, so they look totally different. So here's Ryan, who we had to rescue from the sinkholes a few times, holding a perfectly complete vertebrae from the base of the neck. And then there I am holding one on the right-hand side that has a long stick thing called a process coming off of it. And so if you've noticed, so Matt's pointing out on our model, but when you come up at the end, you can look at that more closely. So mammoths have humps kind of between their shoulders. Does anybody know why they have humps? It's not for the same reason as camels. Yeah? Do you have a guess? No? So think about if you were a mammoth, how heavy your head would be. It's huge, first of all, and on top of that, you've got these big, 10, 12 feet tusks hanging off of there, okay? So it would be really hard to hold your head up, okay? So mammoths, over time, evolved these different types of vertebrae to hold extra muscles. They had extra muscles built in to help hold up their heads, which you would need if your head was that big. So that's why the vertebrae in the middle of their back have those long stick things on them, the processes to hold those extra muscles. So into November, we kept digging. We found another tusk that was definitely from a different animal. It's hard to tell in this picture. I should put the 2 side by side, but this one The first one was about this big around. That one is about this big around. So obviously from a much bigger animal. We found another shoulder blade, but it probably goes with the first one that the farmer found because it's from the left side of the body, and it's about the same size. So by the end of last year, we knew that we had at least 2 mammoths. We're pretty sure we have at least 3 at the site. And at this point, it's hard to tell how many mammoths are out there. So we've been out a few times this year. I haven't actually been able to go back to the site yet because I've been out talking to libraries all over the place, but I'll get to go next week. But they brought in some bones today to our laboratory. They're still finding bones there. So we're going to keep working on this site for quite some time, it looks like. Again, I want to encourage you all to check out our Ice Age exhibit at the Old Capitol Museum, which is up through August 8th, I believe. And associated with that exhibit, we've put together a special website that you can find on our museum website, all about the Ice Age animals that are in that exhibit, as well as the 2 projects I just mentioned, the sloth excavation and the mammoth excavation. So you can, every time we go out to dig, we post a report of what we found. We post lots of pictures. So if you're interested in kind of keeping up with what we're finding at the site, that website is going to stay up even after the exhibit is done, and we're going to keep adding to it. We also have a Flickr site where we keep pictures of everything too, but all that stuff can be reached from the museum's main homepage, and there's a picture of the Iowa's Ice Age Giants logo. If you look for this, that's where you can click on it, and that's kind of our portal to the Ice Age there, okay? So that is the end of our slideshow here. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, yeah, sure.
When you're mentioning the birds, I don't think. I think what were there any ravens?
Ravens?
I mean, on Iowa.
That's a good question. I would assume there probably were, but I'm not sure.
I know, but
Yep.
there were vultures.
Yep, there were some of the, so there weren't only the large birds, like the size of condors. If any of you have been to our bird gallery at the museum, we have a mounted condor, so you can see how big those birds were. But there were also smaller birds too, so I bet there probably were. Put this back up here. Okay, well, yeah,
Well, I actually have a comment.
sure.
There's those 2 mammoths. Probably one was a male and the other one a female. Probably the one that was bigger was probably 2 males.
Okay, so yep, that's one of the theories that we have right now, that we may have an adult or a male and a female, or we may have an older and a younger animal. That's one of the things we're still trying to figure out. Yeah.
How much does mammoth eat?
How much does it eat? Oh my goodness, it eats a lot. I guess I didn't really get into how big they were. So Columbian mammoths could get up to like 12,000 pounds. Okay, that's how much they weighed, like 12 tons. So if you are a really big plant eater, like a mammoth or like a giant sloth like Rusty, you have to eat a lot of plants to stay that big. So I think I've read that it sometimes is estimated they ate several hundred pounds of plants a day. Okay, so a woolly mammoth, probably a little bit less, but you know, when you're a plant eater, there's not as many nutrients in plants as there is in meat, okay? So they would probably just eat most of the day and eat lots of it. So there was a lot of plant life out there to support all these plant eaters like mammoths and giant sloths. That's a good question, okay? All right, well, if you guys want to come up, we have some things. Hold on one second. Hold on. They're so excited to see the cool stuff up there. So if you want to just be patient, because we can't show everybody everything at once, maybe we kind of make a line and go through there. Matt can tell you about some of we brought some replica stuff. We also brought some real mammoth teeth that you can touch. We brought some books to look at. We're here as part of the summer reading program, and I bet your librarians could help you find some pretty cool books about the Ice Age or paleontology or dinosaurs or all that cool stuff. And we also have some postcards you can take, and we have bookmarks, again, since we're here part of the reading program. And we have some tattoos, temporary tattoos of mammoths and sloths, okay? All right, well, thank you all for listening. Please come visit us at the museum, go visit the Ice Age exhibit, and have a wonderful rest of the summer.
Plastic stuff, and then we cut them along the inside so you can see what's inside.
What is it? What is it?
You can look at the model if you want. Well, this would be a spear point. The little ones are arrowheads. This would be a spear point.
Now, those of you guys who grabbed the bookmarks, these butterflies actually have seeds
So,
in them.
you guys should know also,
So if this fell off your bookmark,
these
you might wanna
guys,
grab one.
these guys right here,
Sticks right.
these are mastodon teeth. And mastodon teeth are, I'll get that in a second. Mastodon teeth are closely related. They're another type of elephant type creature. They kind of look a lot like mammoths, except instead of being starting off in the back, being really low and going up to the top really high, small amount of something called silica, which is basically glass in any sort of grass. So if you're eating grass all the time, you'll just wear your teeth down. It'd be like chewing glass all the time. So what they do is they have these really, really big teeth, but you can tell that these guys have lots of different types of teeth. So how many of you guys have lost a baby tooth? Have you gotten any of your adult teeth in? All right, well, these guys, instead of just having baby teeth and adult teeth, these guys have 6 different kinds of teeth.
Is this a dead elephant?
This is part of this would be a mammoth, a very, very small model of one. But you can see how small this guy's tooth is compared to how big these guys are. This is actually the second small that it basically would fit over kind of like that.
That is very large.
Well, that would be an arrowhead as opposed to a spear point.
Aren't these made out of flint?
You would make those out of flint.
Are these actually
Around here, flint would be the best kind. But in different areas, you might use volcanic glass or softer kind of stuff. These belong to a mastodon. This is a baby mammoth. So you can see, this is a baby mammoth. These are like big adult mammoths.
Careful with these. Weird.
Yeah.
This is a giant nose that has. That's what they look like on the outside, and this is what they look like on the inside. Is this a real elephant?
No, that is.
I think this is real.
That's a.
I'm Sarah Horgan. I'm the Education Coordinator with the University of Iowa Museum of Natural History. And we are talking about life in the Ice Age and the Mahaska County Mammoth excavation.